الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله فإن الله تعالى مع المتقين وبعد. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He instructs us in the Quran, and it is a very simple instruction to read, but as we see in our everyday life, unfortunately for many of us, it is difficult to apply. And the reason for the difficulty of application is not due to the complication of the instruction, but rather due to the sicknesses of the heart and the lack of clarity of mind. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He informs us that we as an ummah, and He instructs us and calls us towards unity. Unity. And holding firmly to what? Not just unity for the sake of unity. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ. Holding firmly to the rope of Allah. جَمِيعًا, collectively. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. And do not divide yourselves. This is a God-given instruction This is a Quranic principle. This is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, it is obligatory. It is wajib. Those who do not follow suit, they are committing a sin and they are committing an oppression against themselves and against their ummah, the nation of Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا. Very clear. So the question arises, why is it then that we have a problem in applying it? Why is it that we are not able to unite? Whether it's for ideological reasons, whether it's for nationalistic reasons, whether it's for tribalistic reasons, whether it's for gender differences. What's the problem? The problem is what? The heart. It's the heart, simple. And we mask the problem with different names. Call it ideological, groups. This person is upon this, that person is upon that. This person is not following the haqq, this person is not following the truth. Nations, our country is better than theirs. Tribes, our tribe is better than theirs. Gender, men are better than women, women are better than men, and so on and so forth. Where does it come from? It comes from the founder of such division, Iblis himself. It's from the founder of division, Iblis himself. Why? Because a divided nation is a nation which is very easy to conquer. A divided nation is a nation easy to conquer. If you have a street and each home, they are standing together. The man of the house is standing with his neighbor, the man of his house, against any common enemy that enters into that street to cause problems to the community. It's very difficult for any person to cause problems in that community. Why? Because they stand against the enemy of that community collectively. But if every house are only looking out for themselves, if each person is not concerned with the affairs of his neighbor, and if some unfortunately have sicknesses in their hearts and they want to see the downfall of their neighbor, they're happy to see their neighbor suffering. What happens when a common enemy enters into the area? Each house is taken down one by one. A divided nation, a divided community, they are game to the wolf. A divided flock of individual sheep are game to the wolf. And that's what we have allowed ourselves to become. And that is what some amongst us propagate and instigate. Even in times of despair, in times of loss, in times where we need to be united as an ummah, you still have those that are standing up tall and calling for division and focusing on the issues that we don't agree with amongst ourselves, without looking at all of the issues that we agree with. And they are doing the devil's work for him. They are doing the devil's work for him. A hands-off approach from Iblis himself. Why get my hands dirty when I can let these people do my work for me? That's what's happening. And unfortunately, sometimes these individuals, but not all the time, because sometimes they are munafiqun, hypocrites, straight up and clear cut. Hypocrites, munafiqun, that want to try to bring our ummah down from the inside to make it easy for those who are on the outside. Very simple approach that we have seen time and time again throughout history. Read Islamic history. The only time that we have been left vulnerable is due to hypocrisy within our ranks. Sometimes they're hypocrites. Other times, they are sincere. Other times you have sincere individuals, whether they are young or young-minded. Because if you have a man who is mature in age, still dividing his community on ideological differences, many times secondary ideological differences, on nation lines or on tribalistic lines, this is not a mature man. This is a mature man in mind, but in body, but a young man in mind. It's an immature person. Sometimes they are sincere, although immature. But sincerity does not justify the behavior. The Khawarij, they were sincere. The Khawarij made the worship of the Sahaba look negligible. The worship of the Sahaba in comparison to the Khawarij didn't look like much. The killer of Ali radiallahu ta'ala an, he was a man who, when he was facing death, he did not want to lose his tongue because he did not want to die in a state of not being in remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. From the Khawarij, the killer of Ali radiallahu ta'ala an. Sincerity does not justify one's actions. And this is why it's very important for us as a collective to go back to our tradition of knowing our places and not speaking unless we are qualified to do so. And to use the statement of Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an, which has been used previously. He took his tongue and he said, هذا أوردني الموارد. This, the tongue, put me into problems. That's Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an. One of the Sahaba, I believe Ibn Abbas or Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhum, he said, I am afraid that a word I have uttered has wiped out the good deeds that I've ever done. The Sahaba. Umar radiallahu ta'ala an, one of the Mubashirin bil Jannah, the Khalifa al-Thani after Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an, the one that it was said about him, if there were to be a prophet after the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu salam, it would be Umar. If there were to be a prophet from the nation of Islam, it would be Umar. Like the prophets of Banu Israel. What did he say? He wept and said, I am afraid that I am from the munafiqeen, during his time as a Khalifa. And it was said to him, how? You're from the Mubashirin bil Jannah. And what did he say? That was before the death of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. He didn't see us after his death. Umar ra'an, the same person that in order to make a decision, a political decision, a state decision, would bring the Sahaba of Badr together and would ask them their opinions. Umar radiallahu ta'ala, that would allow himself to be corrected by an elderly lady. He was afraid of his tongue. But yet you have today Muslims, young and old, who are bold with their tongues, who are sharp with their tongues, who cut down communities with their tongues, who are not afraid to take people out of Islam with their tongues. And they speak as if they have all of the solutions for the ummah. Yet many times when you look to the households of these individuals, they don't have solutions for their own homes. Those who talk about the hakim, yet they can't be a hakim in their own house. And just to make sure that it's clear, I'm not saying that the Muslims cannot speak about the hukam, and no, that's another extreme approach. But what we can do prior to focusing on what's above us, focus on ourselves. And unity is an area that we are lacking in today. Lacking. And we cry for the ummah, as has been said so many times. But yet we ourselves, with our own hands, we contribute to the problem. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Man salla salatana, واستقبل قبلتنا وأكل ذبيحتنا فذلك المسلم الذي له ذمة الله وذمة رسوله." عليه الصلاة والسلام. He said, the one who prays our prayer and faces our qibla and eats from our meat, that is the Muslim who has the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the protection of his messenger alayhi salatu wasalam. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam did not specify particular names and groups. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam called us all Ahlul Islam, Ahlul Sunnah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us to follow Hablullah jami'an, collectively, without distinguishing. The Sahaba, they differed. The Tabi'een, they differed. And the tabi'een, they differed both in fiqh and both in issues of theology. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, he differed with those who followed him and those whom he followed. Politically, theologically, jurisprudentially. But the bigger picture did not allow them to remain divided. Unity became a goal prior to Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah ta'ala wa radiya an, conquering and liberating Al-Quds. There was a goal that was set in place by Imad-ad-Din al-Zinki and followed up by Nur-ad-Din al-Zinki, the unification of the ranks of Islam. And unity, again, does not mean uniformity. Unity does not mean uniformity. I do not need to be a carbon copy of my brother. I do not need to share the same opinions as my brother. I can differ with him. But we are united on our common goals. Number one, pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number two, following the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Number three, application of that on this earth, individually and collectively. Number four, standing up for justice and against oppression, whilst keeping ourselves in check. These are our common goals. And we've lost them today to the noise and the discussions. And most of the noise coming from those who are not qualified to speak. It's the blunt reality. And it's one of the calamities of our time. Just because I have a camera, it does not mean that I should use it. Just because I can pronounce words does not mean I should speak. Who gave us the right to have opinions and to put these opinions out publicly, to espouse them publicly? We only need to go back a few years to see the chaos and the problems that were caused by young people putting their opinions out publicly, and they were not qualified to do so. And for those who know, they know. We have to look at what's happening in the world and reassess ourselves. Unity is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it was what the Prophet alayhi salatu salam came to achieve. Uniting the Arabs. Uniting, after that, humanity. Upon what? La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. But today we divide in the name of La ilaha illallah. We divide in the name of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. And that's ignorance. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. الحمد لله وحده وصلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء ومن تبعه وبعد. The other consideration that we need to give a lot of thought to today, individually and collectively, and it is a message that has been given consistently from this minbar and alhamdulillah from many manabir, from this masjid and from many masajid. We need to assess our position and our place in this life. If you were to ask the average Muslim, what's your purpose? They will respond. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah has not created jinn and man except but to worship. Yes, but that's a vague response. That's ambiguous on your part. What does that mean for you as an individual? What does it mean for me collectively? Does it mean to pursue a halal, commercialized Western lifestyle, as long as it's halal, whilst I engage in my ritual ibadah? Does it mean buying a house and buying a car and getting married and having children and living a comfortable life, so long as I'm praying 5 times a day, I'm fasting the month of Ramadan, perhaps some voluntary fasts, I'm giving sadaqah? Is that the purpose of life? Is that ibadah? The Prophet ﷺ, what did he say? Buniya al-Islamu ala khams. Islam was built upon 5 things. The second being the salah. and then zakah, and then siyam, and then hajj. These are the foundational pillars of Islam. They are the pillars of Islam. A person who lives on those 5 things alone is not building. They are not building. Yes, they are important. And yes, they can earn a person a place in paradise. But the Sahaba did not live for those things alone. Say the same about the Quran. Many young brothers and young sisters memorizing the Quran. Why? Why do you memorize the Quran? Because the memorization of the Quran itself has become a noble pursuit. And it's memorized in and of itself a goal. It's memorized to be a goal itself. The Sahaba did not set out to simply memorize the Quran. That was not a goal of the Sahaba. Simple memorization. The memorization serves a purpose, which is what? Application. Salah serves a purpose. What? Purification of the heart. Detaching us from this dunya. Zakah serves a purpose, which is what? To detach us from our pockets and greed and the wealth of this life. Fasting serves a purpose, which is what? To teach us to say no to ourselves and to abstain from our desire and to live for a higher purpose. Are we doing that though in our everyday lives? Our situation will not change. Our situation will not change until we change our situation. That's it. The collective state of the ummah will not change until we change the individual states that we are in and the way that we live. You go back to the Sahaba. They lived for what? They lived for Islam. Islam was not a part of their life. Islam was their life. They did not build their lives around Islam. Islam was their life. Everything would fit into Islam. Likewise the tabi'een. Likewise atba'u tabi'een. And likewise every generation of revival. Every champion of Islam. Every alim from amongst the ulama. They lived for Islam. It's not that Islam was a part of their life. Their life was Islam. They lived for it. They died for it. And they applied it in between everything else. And if we are going to see a change in the state of the world, then we have to change ourselves. And the common factor which prevents every single one of us from making the necessary changes, common. Every single one of us, we have the same problem. That problem is what? Hubbud dunya, love of this life. That's what it is, love of this life. Whether it's the wealth, whether it's the health, whether it's the pleasures, whether it's the thrill-seeking, whether it's whatever else it might be, the excitement, whether it's the halal of this dunya and this life, or it's the haram of this dunya and this life. It's crept into our hearts. As was mentioned, how many times? The Prophet ﷺ said, the end of times, what? Will be in the hearts of the Muslims. Al-wahn. Love of this life. Hubb ad-dunya wa karahiyatul maut. Love of this life and a hatred for death. That's it. That's the problem. It's not what we face. It's not what's happening outside. It's not the strength of others and the weakness of ourselves materially. It's simply the love that we have for this dunya and the pursuit of this dunya, and everything else has become secondary. Until that changes, our situation will not change. And the generation that do change the state of our ummah, the generation that one day see a free Palestine, a free Quds, that see the lands of Islam free and able to apply Islam as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained. Those individuals, they will be a generation, a people that are completely detached from this life and completely attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the akhirah. That's the reality. And so if we cannot be such a people, then we will not be from those that see a free Quds or a free Palestine or a free whichever land it is that you want to put into those brackets. We will not see it until we first free ourselves from the shackles and chains of this life, of this dunya. That's it. A heart which is enslaved cannot liberate others. A slave cannot liberate other slaves. He has to first free himself. And until we free ourselves, that should be the pursuit. Liberation of self. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make that the case. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala free our hearts of this dunya. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aid and grant victory to the people of Islam. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant His cure and recovery for those who have been afflicted and are sick, no matter where they are. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. وارض اللهم عن أبي بكر وعن عمر وعن عثمان وعن علي وعن سائر الصحابة أجمعين. اللهم تب علينا واعف عنا إنك أنت العفو الكريم. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصرهم نصرا مؤزرا يا رب العالمين. اللهم أيدهم بتأييدك. اللهم ارفع راية الإسلام. اللهم حررنا من الدنيا. اللهم يا مطهر القلوب طهر قلوبنا إنك مجيب الدعوات. وأقم الصلاة.